When subcultures meant separation. Before subcultures were visible, they were separate. That separation wasn't symbolic, it was practical. Geographic, social, and informational barriers made participation hard. You couldn't casually browse a subculture on Reddit. You had to find it, enter it, and stay long enough to learn its rules. Early punk scenes existed around specific venues and record stores. Graffiti culture developed block by block, and distinct styles evolved locally before spreading outward. Skateboarding scenes were tied to particular cities, crews, and spots. Early hip hop was inseparable from the neighborhoods that produced it. Subcultures were environments. Participation required commitment. You had to make time for it, be there, and often risk your safety or freedom. Info on the subculture moved slow. New music traveled through tapes and word of mouth. Style evolved because people copied each other in person, not because they saw it instantly online. That slowness mattered. It allowed norms to form in the group. Respect was earned through contribution and consistency, not visibility. Status was local and contextual. Being recognized outside the group often meant very little inside it. This separation also protected meaning. Because outsiders couldn't easily observe or participate, symbols retained weight. Style signaled belonging, not trends. Language developed nuance because it wasn't constantly translated for a broader audience. Subcultures were never meant to spread. Importantly, most of these groups did not see their lifestyles as content. They weren't performing for an audience. Recording themselves was secondary, and usually for the memory of it. The culture existed first for its members, not for consumption by others. This distinction is easy to miss in hindsight, but it's foundational. The death of subcultures began when the separation stopped being possible. The moment everything became visible. The break didn't happen when subcultures got popular. It happened when they got easy to watch. Once the internet made documentation effortless, the line between being part of something and just looking at it collapsed. Scenes that once took years to discover could now be found in minutes. You didn't need to know anyone. You didn't need to be there. You just needed a screen. That changed everything. Graffiti shows this clearly. For a long time, styles evolved locally. Letter forms, techniques, and reputations were tied to specific neighborhoods. If you copied someone without context, people noticed, and there were consequences. Influence moved slow, and style carried location with it. Once photo archives and social platforms took over, that friction disappeared. A style developed in one city could be lifted, reposted, and repeated somewhere else the same week. No relationship to the place, no connection to the people who built it. The look survived, the world around it didn't. Punk and hardcore scenes went through the same shift. Early punk wasn't something you stumbled into online. It lived in small venues, local bands, record stores, and word of mouth. If you wanted in, you had to show up. Knowledge moved through shows, zines, and tapes passed between people. When those scenes became fully documented online, the barrier dropped. The music, the clothes, and the attitude became accessible without participation. You could adopt the surface without ever stepping into the environment that shaped it. The culture became understandable to outsiders before it had time to settle on its own terms. Skateboarding followed a similar path. Progress used to be local and reputational. Videos circulated slowly. Style and innovation were shaped by specific crews, spots, and cities. If you weren't around, you missed things. Once skate media centralized online, everything fed into the same loop. Tricks traveled instantly. Aesthetics flattened. What mattered more wasn't contribution to a scene, but how something looked on camera. Skill still mattered, but context mattered less. None of this killed creativity, but it changed behavior. When everything became visible, people started acting like they were being watched. Scenes documented themselves earlier. Choices were made with an audience in mind. Styles locked in faster because they were being judged immediately instead of evolving quietly. Exposure showed up before coherence. Outsiders had always arrived eventually. That wasn't new. What changed was timing. They were there from the beginning, and when a culture knows it's being observed right away, it starts explaining itself. It simplifies, it becomes easier to recognize and easier to copy. That's when subcultures stopped being places you entered and started becoming things you could scroll past. Monetization at birth. For a long time, subcultures lived broke. Money showed up late, if it showed up at all. Scenes formed first. Values settled first. Only after something had proven it could survive on its own did anyone try to turn it into a product. That delay mattered. It gave people time to figure out what was acceptable, what wasn't, and who actually belonged. By the time money arrived, the culture already had rules. That order flipped. Streetwear makes this obvious. Early streetwear came straight out of skate and graffiti scenes. It was local, limited, and hard to get. Clothes worked like signals. If you knew, you knew. If you didn't, you didn't. Once online retail and social media took over, that barrier disappeared. Brands no longer had to grow inside scenes. They could launch fully formed, sell globally, and borrow the language of subculture without ever participating in one. What used to take years of credibility could now be skipped with distribution. Platforms pushed this even further. YouTube, Instagram, and later TikTok made attention cheap and fast. A new scene could get visibility before it had any internal standards. People were rewarded for being early and visible, not for sticking around and contributing. That changed what participation looked like. Instead of showing up for the culture, people started showing up for the opportunity. Being part of something became a potential career move. Visibility turned into validation. Internal respect got replaced by numbers everyone could see. Music followed the same pattern. Genres that once grew through regional scenes now show up online already packaged. The sound, the look, and the attitude arrive together, optimized to be understood immediately. Artists are pushed to explain themselves fast, because ambiguity doesn't perform well. The culture arrives labeled, tagged, and ready to spread. None of this requires bad intentions. Brands respond to demand. Platforms reward engagement. Creators use the tools in front of them. No one has to sabotage anything for the result to be the same. The system just makes patience expensive. The part that disappears is the long, unprofitable stretch where meaning used to form. The phase where nothing scaled, nothing paid, and most people quit. By the time a scene feels recognizable now, it's often already done developing. Not because people lost interest, but because growth showed up too early. Once subcultures became visible and monetizable, something else changed with them. Participation stopped requiring commitment. Style used to come bundled with behavior. Where you went, who you knew, what you risked, and how long you stayed all mattered. You didn't just wear the look. You lived inside the conditions that produced it. That link broke. Fashion shows this better than almost anything. Punk style used to mean specific venues, specific bands, and specific social circles. Wearing it came with consequences. People knew where you stood, and they expected you to back it up. It wasn't just clothes, it was alignment. Now, the same visuals circulate freely. You can buy the uniform without ever stepping into the world it came from. The symbols still exist, but they don't point to shared experience anymore. They point to taste. The aesthetic stayed, the obligation didn't. Music culture shifted the same way. Scenes that once required physical presence now live mostly as references online. You can adopt the sound, the look, and the language without ever engaging with the people who built it. There's no expectation that you contribute anything back. You're not joining a group. You're selecting a vibe. Online identity makes this easier. Platforms encourage constant self-reinvention. They reward novelty, clarity, and quick recognition. Sticking with one scene for a long time doesn't really help you. Moving on does. Because of that, identities get worn lightly. People cycle through styles fast, not because they're shallow, but because nothing is asking them to stay. This isn't about people failing to take culture seriously. It's structural. When subcultures lose isolation, they also lose the ability to enforce norms. There's no clear inside or outside anymore. Without that boundary, style can't signal commitment. It can only signal awareness. What you end up with is a huge archive of looks, sounds, and references that anyone can pull from at any time. That's why modern culture feels visually rich but emotionally thin. There's constant variation on the surface, but very little that hardens into something durable. Difference exists, but it doesn't stack. It resets with each cycle. Subcultures didn't disappear. The pressure that once made them binding did. What replaced them? When subcultures lost separation, time, and internal obligation, they didn't leave nothing behind. They were replaced by systems built for visibility instead of belonging. What took their place were fast-moving clusters organized around platforms, algorithms, and shared references. These groups can form quickly, grow large, and disappear just as fast, because nothing is holding them together beyond attention. They feel active, but they're light. Core trends make this easy to see. Labels that once would have described live cultures now work like search terms. They help platforms group content and help people signal taste without committing to anything long-term. The name becomes the product, and the product can be swapped out as soon as something new shows up. Participation turns into recognition. This setup rewards speed. People move toward whatever's legible, trending, and easy to align with. Novelty is constant, but depth is optional. Because nothing asks for sustained investment, nothing builds history. There is no reason to stay long enough for disagreement, hierarchy, or evolution to happen. What looks like diversity is often repetition moving fast. Some subcultures do still survive, but under stricter conditions. They tend to exist where visibility is limited, where access is controlled, or where participation still costs something. Local scenes, private communities, and skill-based practices hold onto some of the old dynamics precisely because they don't scale well. Those are exceptions. The larger shift isn't toward sameness, it's toward interchangeability. Identity becomes something you sample instead of something you inhabit. Style becomes expressive rather than binding. Difference exists, but it rarely hardens into structure. That's why so much culture today feels busy but weightless. Subcultures didn't disappear because people stopped caring about meaning. They disappeared because the systems we built made exposure free and commitment expensive. And once exposure became unavoidable, the conditions that allowed subcultures to form couldn't hold.